We are back with another pod with the man himself, Andrew Wilkinson.
Hey, dude.
Well,
How you doing?
to the channel. I am doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So we just wrapped up a pod and, we talked about my background and whatnot, and you're sort of new to the influencer game. You're, what is the motivation between you getting out there and putting your face on podcasts and doing all these, I suppose, more prevalent, and frequent podcast appearances on other people's channels and whatnot? Like, who is Andrew Wilkinson and why are you kind of coming out from behind the scenes now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting. I've been building my business for over 20 years. Actually, no, just under 20 years now. And we were really anonymous. We live in Victoria, Canada, me and my business partner, and we weren't on any podcasts. No one really knew who we were. And then over COVID, I got a little bit bored and I started saying yes to business podcasts and stuff. Started going on My First Million, became like a regular guest there. And I really found that, A, it's fun. Like, I enjoy talking to those guys. I love having interesting conversations with interesting people, but it enabled me to meet a ton of great people. So, when I was in Hawaii recently, some, nervous business bro shuffled over to our table and was like, "Hey man, can I pay for your dinner? Like, I listened to your podcast 2 years ago and I ended up starting a business as a result." And so I have all these cool moments like that as a result. And so
Did you let him pay?
I didn't want to, but he ended up going and paying anyway. It was really nice of him. And we ended up having coffee later. And so I've just found that, the louder you are, the more you let yourself out there, the more people you allow to know you, even if it's a parasocial relationship, a one-way relationship. Generally, the more good things happen. And then separately from that, I mean, our business is buying businesses. And so when people like me, they, if they're like, "Oh, that guy seems nice, I'd sell my business to him," they send us an email and sometimes we buy their businesses. So that's kind of a nice third order effect of, going out there and talking about what I do. And then the other thing is, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of your audience doesn't know who I am, but I basically own about 40 different companies. Didn't start there, but in my day-to-day, I actually have CEOs running everything. And so I don't get hands-on. I don't get to actually do anything. Like most people, they do their job. And at the end of the day, whether they're making widgets in a factory or writing a book or whatever it is, they ship a thing. You put your video up on YouTube, you get this moment of shipping. And for me, for the last 10 years, I really haven't had that. And so for me, like my Twitter, my email newsletter, my podcast, my book, those are all things that I could just do myself, where I'm an individual contributor. I don't have to have a team. I don't have to have other people involved. And so I'm just enjoying it more and more and more.
So you mentioned 40 businesses. That's a lot. I just read your book, Never Enough. Great read, by the way. I will hopefully be able to time the release of this podcast to when that's out. And if so, it'll be linked in the description below. But in there, you describe in more detail how you went from, aspiring entrepreneur to having the 40 businesses and what is, a part of that whole process, but at a high level for people who are new to you and your content and all about your background. Like, how did you go from, meager beginnings, Vancouver-based Andrew to 40 businesses, Victoria tycoon Andrew?
Yeah, so 20 years ago, I was a college dropout. I lasted about 2 months at Ryerson University in Toronto doing journalism. And I dropped out. I was living at my parents' house. I was working as a barista for $6.50 an hour. And I was trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my life? I was feeling really lost. And these two guys started coming to the cafe, and they would just go on their laptops all day and sit there and drink espresso after espresso. And one day I said, "What do you guys do? Don't you have jobs? How do you just sit here all day?" And they said, "Well, we design websites. We have a web design agency." And I started asking them about how it worked. And it turned out these guys would basically just find local businesses that didn't have websites, and then they would charge them, $5-10 or whatever it was to make sites for them. And I started doing the math in my head, and I was like, oh my God, these guys are living the dream. I want this. I want to be the guy drinking the espresso, not the guy serving the espresso. And so I went and I bought a book on web design. I already kind of knew a little bit and taught myself. And I started finding jobs. The first one that I did was a pulled pork barbecue joint. I walked in and said, "Hey, can I do it for some free sandwiches and $500?" And he said, yes. And, you know, when you think about it, when you're working as a barista and you're making, I don't know, I was making maybe $2,000 a month or something, the idea that I could go and build a website in a couple of days and make that much money was kind of astounding. And it just snowballed from there. So I quit my job. I started working with bigger and bigger companies. I went from tiny little ones to working with Apple, Google, Walmart, Silicon Valley startups. This is over the course of 10 years, to be clear. And I was making quite a bit of money and I didn't know what to do with it. And, you know, I remember there was this moment when I first started where I said, well, if I just can wake up whenever I want and I can afford to buy myself dinner and I can afford my rent, like then I'll be happy. And I just noticed that bar just kept slipping. You know, it was when I had $100,000 in the bank, I wanted 200,000. When I had 500,000, I wanted 1,000,000. It was always elusive, a sense of enough, of calm, of security. And so, you know, I just kept growing my business and I had more and more employees. I took a lot of the money that I made from that original design agency and I started a whole bunch of businesses. I started about 10 companies, everything ranging from a skincare company to a designer cat furniture company to a pizza restaurant. And in almost all of those, I lost all my money and like one or two of them worked. And so about 10 years ago, I was running all these companies. I was kind of miserable. I had a couple businesses that worked and I ended up picking up a book about Warren Buffett. And when I read about Warren Buffett, I was like, oh my God, this guy has the cheat codes to life. He's literally like the richest person on earth. And all he does all day is read and buy businesses. And what Warren Buffett does, if you don't know, is he buys companies and then he hires CEOs and CEOs run them. And, you know, I obviously knew what delegation was, right? I understood that. I worked in a cafe. I understood that the owner of the cafe and the manager, you know, the owner hired the manager and the manager hired me. But what I didn't realize was that you could just hire someone to run an entire business. And so about 10 years ago, I hired CEOs for all my companies, and I found that they started growing even faster than when I was running them. And then over the last 10 years, me and my business partner, Chris, started buying businesses. And now we own everything from Letterboxd, which is the largest social network for film buffs, to AeroPress, which is a very famous coffee maker company, to a whole bunch of different software businesses and all sorts of other stuff. So I didn't intend to get here, right? Kind of like you know, when I was working as a barista, I first of all, I thought business was like horrible. I didn't want to be part of that. That was like, business was a thing that my dad came home from looking sad in a suit. Like I didn't want anything to do with that. And yet somehow I ended up becoming an investor. So there's this very weird path.
Yeah, I do find it interesting how oftentimes, at least for me too, when I actually started to go down the road of entrepreneurship, like I had an adult brain that was logical, reasonably intelligent, all for many years prior, but still never had put the pieces together. It wasn't a concept I had even wrapped my head around whatsoever. And it sounds like you similar, like you were just, you know, a barista, and just, even though you have this drive innately now that you're on the path, like even finding it and conceiving how to go about it and forge it was, you know, it's not necessarily built within you. Like you almost have to like craft it or like be exposed to something that triggers like the inspiration. Or
a series of, me and my business partner always joke that we like have spent the last 20 years taking forks and sticking them in electrical sockets and jiggling them around and seeing where we get electrocuted and learning from it. And I mean, my first job was at McDonald's and I was like, well, this is freaking horrible, right? I remember one time I took a bunch of bags of garbage, I threw them in the trash compactor, and I pressed a button and there was a gap in the trash compactor and it got squirted with a face full of scrambled eggs from McDonald's breakfast, right? From the garbage. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing this, right? And then I went and I worked at the Gap, and all I was doing all day is smiling and folding clothes and, filling out forms and stuff. And I realized, okay, that's not for me either, right? Then I was like, I love coffee. I love cafe culture. I love talking to people. I'll try being a barista. And I actually loved being a barista. I easily could have become a coffee shop owner, but I hated waking up at 5 a.m. and mopping the floor. And so it just was this weird progression of like, whenever I didn't like anything, I would just look for the thing that I might like more. And I somehow stumbled into investing. But I mean, like, I failed grade 11 math. I literally had to go and beg my grade 11 math teacher to give me an extra % so I could pass and get my diploma. So like, I would never predict that I would become someone in like finance.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a cool fact to point to though too, because I think people think there's some sort of innate, genetically predisposed talent to entrepreneurship. That isn't necessarily the case. It sounds like you didn't even have the idea of maybe where to start until you saw some guys working on some stuff in the cafe you were a barista at. For me, when I was in university getting my useless degree, I saw a YouTube video that my friend showed me just on a whim, like, hey, check this guy out doing pickup in the mall. And like, that was where I found Chris, who's my now business partner, and found his website about self-improvement and saw all the stuff he was doing entrepreneurship wise. And it was like an inspirational blueprint for me. And like, I certainly had no concept of, or even motivation to be an entrepreneur really at that time. So, there's a lot of people I think who are young and don't think they're cut out for certain things because it's just not, they can't grasp it, but there's certainly like a learning curve. And it's not like even the most successful of people like yourself, even from teenagehood, it's not like you were already building businesses and even knew what to do. Like, there's no blueprint.
It's interesting. I think like the number one trait I see in great entrepreneurs is they never envy people. When they see people that are more successful than them, they don't envy them. They go, well, I think that person is smart, but they're not that smart. Like, what books did they read? Like, I'm sure you saw that guy who was doing the pickup thing and you're like, oh, I could do that. Like, he's like obviously a really smart, interesting guy, but you could probably duplicate that same thing. And I think that if there's any one thing that I've done, it's just been whenever I meet someone who's the next level, I just go like, tell me your cheat codes. How do I reverse engineer this? And I just try and learn from them. Whereas I think there's a habit in today's society of being like, oh, well, this person is just there because of XYZ privilege. And not to say there obviously is like privilege is a thing and all that stuff, but I do think that people kind of tear that down. And I think the best thing you can do as an entrepreneur is to be humble and just go, how do I learn the cheat codes from all these smart people?
So the cheat codes or learning to get to, I don't know, that point to even get to where you were, the journey, has there been, you asked me earlier about content I've consumed or things that have stood out, books, you're more of a reader than I. What are some of the most impactful books on your journey that you still think are relevant today for somebody who's up and coming to either get the mindset or learn about business, to actually get the skills and or even mindset to go about, forging a path for themselves?
Yeah, I'd say the most influential book I read, it has a horrible douchey title. It's called How to Get Rich. And it's by this guy, Felix Dennis. Have you read this book by any chance? He's the guy who started Maxim magazine. That's what he's best known for. But he built this huge publishing empire. So he had all these technology magazines, very wide variety of businesses. And he wrote this book when he was in his 70s. And it basically tells his story of going from kind of like this, almost like a communist hippie guy who started making Bruce Lee posters, right? Literally, that's how he got started. He started making Bruce Lee posters and somehow ended up in this publishing empire because he went, oh, I can make these magazines that sell the posters. He got into the magazine business and over time expanded into this thing. And so I think reading that when I was 19 or 20 or whenever I read it was really instructive to go, okay, this guy's kind of like me. Like he's a nobody and he managed to build this big thing. And so I think, the most important stuff I read in the beginning was expanding my mind to all the possibilities. From there, it was really the tools. So, for example, there's a really great book by Jay Abraham called Getting Everything You Can Out of All You Got, or All That You Have, or something like that. And it's kind of like this huge list of all the different ways that you can make money. So basically, it's like cheat codes. It's like, okay, if you're a dentist, just as a really boring example, you could have a membership program. You could have a referral program. You could advertise in a very particular way. And it's just like everything as a business that you can do to make more money or to market or to get more customers. And so I read that book, and that was very foundational. And then I read another book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. And Robert Cialdini is a famous psychologist who I think he has done like a ton of like landmark studies around psychology, specifically around people's behaviors. So, for example, there's this study where if you put your hand in a bucket of cold water and then you put it into a bucket of medium water, you'll perceive it to be colder than if you put it in a bucket of hot water and then into the middle, right? Like weird stuff like that. And he takes that psychology and he applies it to kind of like business and decision making. So, for example, let's say you're a realtor. You take someone to a shit house, right? An absolute horrible place. Then you take them to the most expensive possible house, right? The ridiculous mansion. And they're going, oh my God, like, I would never buy this place. This place is out of my budget. And then you take them to the reasonably priced, good house, right? Mm. And when people see the good house, the contrast of the other two causes them to jump on it and go, well, this is amazing because those other two are too extreme. And so he applies that to things like, realtors or sales or even pricing. If you have a product you're selling, you can have, $9.99, $14.99, or $20. Most people will choose $14.99. And so I read that book and was just like devouring it, going like, oh my God, there's all these psychological things that I wasn't factoring in. And I learned to use those when I was selling, when I was, marketing our products, all that kind of stuff. And then another great book I read was called Made to Stick. And that was really the book that taught me how to write. It's by Dan and Chip Heath. I'll still always remember the first line of the book is something like, I was in a bathtub full of ice and I felt to my back and realized that there was an incision where my kidney was, right? That's the start of the book. And the whole idea of the book is, how do you write in a way that hooks people? How do you write in a way that's memorable?
Raise my eyebrows.
Right, exactly. Peter Attia did that. He has, the first line of his book is, the eggs kept falling and I knew I had to keep catching them. What a weird sentence. But he obviously read a book like Made to Stick. He knows how to hook people. And so those three books, so the Jay Abraham one, the Dan and Chip Heath one, and the Influence, those really were foundational for me in terms of just like, how do you operate an exceptional business? And you'll notice that none of those are really business books. None of them are business operating manuals. They're simply just like three distinct skill sets.
So that's a great takeaway for go-to books. What are your thoughts on the typical recommendations people make, like how to make friends and influence people? Or I forget what the other one is. There's like one very popular one that supposedly was written as if it was a true story, and then it turned out the guy was totally fabricated or something. Do you know what I'm...
Oh, Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
A bunch of those, yeah.
Yeah. Are those worth reading, or are they just like...
Oh, I think like you can learn something from anything, right? I mean, we were just doing a podcast for this, and you mentioned like, pickup artists and all that stuff. And I remember I read The Game back in the day, and it's like this, very well read. Neil Strauss is a great writer, kind of an absurd thing. And, there's some sexist stuff in it or whatever, but I drew a few like really interesting insights from it. And so like, for example, for me, I was like, oh my God, when I talk to a girl, I'm like hunching over and I'm like nervously holding my beer in front of me. And there were gems in it, right? And so I think all these books, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the Napoleon Hill stuff, they all have something to offer. And I think you can get benefit from reading those. But I think you're much better off focusing on like one or two or three books and just pounding them into your head. Like there's books that I've read like 5 times. There's speeches like Charlie Munger gave this great speech at Harvard 20 years ago. And every day when I would drive downtown, I would just listen to it over and over and over again and pound it into my head. So I'm a big fan of like choosing your Bible, basically.
Yeah, it seems to be a common theme I see among successful entrepreneurs is getting really deep on a more narrow set of content to actually absorb it and assimilate it rather than surface level trying to blast through as many books as possible, which is a typical approach. So
totally. I mean, you look at being good at psychology and being good at decision making is probably it's the broadest skill, right? You can apply that to your personal life. You can apply that to business. You can apply that to marketing and sales, online, offline. And I think getting good at those 2 areas is probably more important than almost anything. I mean, you read a business management book and yeah, it's going to give you like a structure of how to manage a company or whatever, but your company is going to change over and over and over again. I think focusing on those kind of, Charlie Munger calls it like building your lattice work of mental models of ideas that are applicable across a broad range of subjects, I think is just such a tremendous payoff.
So why did you write a book? Because it's like, you make enough money as is. It's a huge time investment. Surely it's not for the economic upside of your time to make whatever the margin is on a hardcover book. Like, what is the point of, like, I see a lot of successful people at some point, it almost seems like given that they're gonna, writing my book. It's like, okay, why do you need a book? Like, you already make online content where you can get your ideas out in 1,000 times faster efficiency than sitting there and writing something. Like, what is the motivation?
Well, first of all, there's no way to make money writing books. I mean, talk to any author. I guarantee if you're like a YouTuber or, you do something else, you can make so much more money than writing books. There's very few people like James Clear and Morgan Housel can make millions of dollars, but very few people do. So certainly not to make money. I think it's kind of what we were talking about a moment ago, where I have been craving a way to get a flow state and to actually produce something with my own hands that I don't need to work with a team of people. And frankly, I've always used writing as a way to muddle through my own thoughts. And so really writing this book, I was trying to figure out what am I going to do with the next chapter of my life? I was kind of going through like a bit of an existential crisis. I'm 38. I've been writing it since I was like 35. And I just was feeling kind of lost, and it was a weird place to be. And so I wanted to tell the story of my business career, but really talk about a lot of the stuff that I was feeling and challenges that I was facing. And in talking to other people in business who have been successful, I realized that it's kind of this disease that we all have. And so I just love that process. And then going back to also what I was referencing before of, if I go on your podcast, maybe someone is going to watch this and I'm going to meet a new friend. Maybe they'll watch this and I'll buy a business. Now, I think that it's such a more intimate relationship to actually let someone else exist in your head for 5 to 10 hours. Like when I read a book, I remember a couple of years ago, I read Andre Agassi's book, and I started, I couldn't care less about Andre Agassi. B, I couldn't care less about professional tennis. By the end of it, I felt like I knew this guy. If I saw Andre Agassi, I'd go give him a hug, right? And I think there's something really powerful and interesting about that. So for me, I mean, it's kind of an experiment, right? I used to write blogs. I've done Twitter. I do podcasts. I wonder what it's like to have a long form book. I mean, I don't know.
So it's definitely not profitable, is what we're saying.
I don't think so.
How many hours did you spend in total on it, do you think?
Oh my God. It's hundreds, thousands of hours. I mean, it's insane how long it takes to write a book. I started it in 2020. It's about to go get published in July 2024. So it's quite the odyssey.
Now, when you're a publicly traded company and you have shareholders who are holding you to a standard of performance and they know you're spending thousands of hours writing a book that is like just about you and is like a personal passion project, is that like a point of contention ever, or is it you can do whatever you want kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I've always been loud, right? Our way of talking about what we do and attracting attention instead of going out and buying ads has been talking, whether it's in the early days when I was running MetaLab, my first design agency. I would go and I would pick a fight or call someone out, kind of like you do, right? I would say, hey, that person ripped off that design from someone else. And I'd write a big blog post. I'd post it on Reddit. It would go viral. And then we would get a bunch of attention and work as a result. A couple years ago, I started posting on Twitter and I got up to hundreds of thousands of followers just by sharing, hey, here's how we do business, my opinions, whatever. And so I think that it's well understood by our shareholders and, by everyone at Tiny that, look, I'm a loudmouth. I'm going to keep being a loudmouth and talking about what we're doing, and that will have downstream benefits. And also Tiny actually gets all the revenue from the book. So, yeah.
So you asked me about products, things that improve your quality of life or you just think are cool. You sent me a long list before. If you had to narrow it down to, I don't know, I would love to say top 5, but it's hard to rank because you know, there's a lot of cool stuff you've uncovered over the years. I remember you even sent me the best vacuum or something. You had a big long list. What would you say is just 5 things that that come to mind immediately as this is a huge ROI, either efficiency, output, productivity, whatever?
Well, I've got a boring list, which is mostly health stuff, and then I have the sexier list. I have
a lot.
This is literally, so I have a newsletter I send out weekly, and all it is me just evangelizing. I'll sign you up for it, but I just evangelize products and talk about whatever I'm digging on, because probably my favorite thing in the world is do I have something in my house that's poorly designed where I can replace it with something that's well designed, or do I have a problem where a product will solve it? Really boring example is I snore at night. I struggle with that. I know you have a CPAP. I've experimented with that, but I wear snore strips, and it's these things cost $5, but they're my sleep is better. I feel awesome. I go to sleep faster. So there's everything the boring stuff like that to I own a $5,000 mechanical hand lubricated keyboard made by a keyboard artisan named Ryan Norbauer. We ended up investing in his company, and it's ridiculous. It's the most absurd luxury. Can you imagine? It's a fucking keyboard, but it's made of titanium, perfectly milled, and he made custom keycaps, and the switch that powers them is engineered in Denmark, custom made. I love stuff like that. So I've got a wide range of that. I love Dyson products. I love Bowers and Wilkins. I love Macintosh, which is a really expensive, fancy amplifier company. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's lots of stuff that I like.
Quick interruption to bring you a note from one of today's sponsors, Marek Health, my premium telehealth platform. And I felt fitting for this episode because not only are we running a first time ever Black Friday sale, 25% off site-wide on lab work and also oversight, worth noting, but also just I figured people who are watching this episode would be probably individuals who are probably self-improvement minded, entrepreneurial, aspiring to enhance their either be cognitive function, mental performance, physical performance, or to get a high level of medical oversight for themselves and or their family. It just felt like a fitting spot. So here I am telling you guys about Marek Health if you don't already work with them. Premium telehealth platform where we have rigorous diagnostic metrics to evaluate your current status of health and figure out where there are holes that can be addressed to optimize things and not just enhance your health and get it to where it should be, but also to improve your performance, body composition, etc. We utilize an array of testing, blood, urine, saliva, whatever is necessary. And also, if you end up going down the pharmacologic route and you end up assessing your viability for hormone therapy, we are one of the few clinics that actually will assess your pre-existing status rigorously to see what your fertility metrics are like, to see if you actually need hormone therapy, what your signaling is from your brain to your testes, all of the things you would want to hope to think that somebody is looking out for as a medical professional before you get on a lifelong therapy, and then also to ensure it's even being administered correctly and in the optimal fashion to optimize your results, but also to not fuck yourself up in the process. That is what we specialize in, essentially, is ensuring that all systems of health subcategorize into different organ systems, but also just endocrine, I think primarily too, is something that we are on the cutting edge of when it comes to staying rigorously on top of all the most recent literature to ensure that our clinical guidelines meet the standard of care that we would want to get ourselves as patients. Like, the whole inception of this company stemmed from my frustration of not being able to get high quality oversight for myself, but also for my family, preventatively. I don't want to wait till somebody's having a jammer and is in the hospital to get told about, how far along they were with plaque buildup, for example. So Marek Health was born, and the individuals who have come on board since inception, it's been an exceptional journey to date, and super rewarding and very cool to see it come to fruition with such a pool of high quality talents and individuals who are so passionate about learning. So we have professionals that are not just the most qualified, but in addition, they actually care about continuously educating themselves, which is what sets us apart, in my opinion. The amount of nerdiness that I exhibit in my videos is like, there's a bunch of people like me in the company with actual medical credentials who have gone to school for this stuff. You can rest assured you are working with people who actually care and aren't just there to basically impart medical oversight from something they learned 20 years ago. It's people who are still passionate about staying on the cutting edge and often join this industry for the same frustrations I had in order to bring a higher standard to the industry and to move the needle and push it forward. So anyways, if that sounds like something you're interested in, it's 25% off for both lab work. If you want to make your own lab panels, you can too, or you can use our pre-designed panels vetted by myself and our team. As well, guided optimization, 25% off, which is literally getting your lab work assessed, interpreted. You actually get educated about what is off and why it may be off and how to improve it through natural means, supplements, dietary interventions, sleep hygiene manipulations, but also pharmacology if warranted, and we will design customized treatment protocols accordingly based on what you need, not based on what we want to prescribe you, which is what happens at a lot of clinics, unfortunately. So anyways, if that sounds like something you would be interested in, we work with a lot of high-level athletes, professionals, people who just also want the highest quality care, but it's even reflected in the level of elite athletes that we work with. I believe that you can get the same level oversight as somebody like a literal Mr. Olympia. Like, we oversee Samson Dauda right now, and an array of other incredible professionals and athletes. And it's been a rewarding process, to say the least. And I think the results speak for themselves in terms of who's been aligning themselves with us and whatnot. So anyways, check it out. Link is in the description below. You can use code BLACK to save 25% off on labs or guided optimization. And back to our regularly scheduled programming.
You should go on. Let's have a top 5.
Give me categories.
Some boring and sexy. That was a great segregation. Yeah. By the way, snoring. So you asked me in my podcast with you about, why is the 8 sleep? Why do you like it? And what does it actually do from like a practical takeaway metrics? Are they improving? Like, how do you determine it's actually helping you? The newest one that just came out that the owner, I guess, texted you about, it has, this is just, it's not a plug necessarily, but it's just like very topical to what you just mentioned about snoring. They have a pad underneath the mattress now that if you snore, it detects on your side of the bed or your partner how many minutes you snore, and it will adjust your side of the bed.
I saw this, yeah. It looks sweet. That's awesome. That was honestly, in that moment, I was like, okay, that's the thing I need.
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know if that would get rid of the need for the strips, but it's at least helping in a way that is like very unique.
It's one of those things where it's like, improving your sleep by 1% is like probably the best investment in terms of just like mental health and all the other stuff. On the sleep thread, I also have a Tempur-Pedic sleep mask, which is like, I don't know, it's like a $20 thing on Amazon. but it perfectly forms around your face. I always bring it to a hotel. I sleep with a cotton blanket, like a woven cotton blanket instead of a duvet. Find I sleep way better. Those are like the boring ones.
What do you bring sleep-wise with you when you're traveling?
Dude, this is so embarrassing. Like, I will literally carry a separate bag with me, and I have my own pillow. I'll bring a white noise machine. I'll bring a cotton blanket. I'll bring my my nose strips, the sleep mask, all of it. Like, I'm hardcore about that stuff.
What are the best nose strips?
Breathe Right, extra strength.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that just like at grocery stores?
You
Or
can
is
buy
that
it anywhere. Yeah.
even in Canada?
Oh yeah.
Oh, so they must be really readily accessible.
Yeah, we can get some here right now.
Oh, no, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so boring stuff. I don't even know, like, because to some people, boring is interesting. So if you could name 3 things that are boring and 3 things that are sexy.
Okay. For years, I was looking for the perfect pair of jeans, and I feel like everything is like ball crushing, too hot. You know, you buy like Japanese denim, the fancy stuff, and like you're not allowed to wash it or whatever. And I finally found these jeans. These are Doer jeans. It's actually a Vancouver company, local. And they feel like sweatpants. They look like normal pants, but they're like stretchy and comfortable. And I'll actually choose to wear these over sweatpants in my house. I absolutely love
That's great.
I really love Outweigh socks. Super, super comfortable merino socks. Victoria company, actually.
Is that keyboard Mac compatible?
Yeah. Let's come back to this and I'll write out a list and remember it all because I have like 20 things.
Sure. The book, there was a few things that stood out to me that I related to, especially as a Canadian entrepreneur myself. But one of the general themes that I think was a pretty obvious takeaway for anyone was the perception of how attractive it is to get exorbitant amounts of wealth and the diminishing returns that you noticed, especially as you met some of these hyper successful people. It seemed like the general theme was the grass isn't always greener, and the higher up the success ladder you climbed and the more, prominence or rich of people you met, you would see just a theme of comparisons among one another, general unhappiness with their current situation because they always want like the next increment of wealth that they would then be happy at. It kind of created this portrayal that, the most successful people are stuck chained to this hedonic treadmill essentially. And the end goal ultimately would almost be, even if you were on the hedonic treadmill, it would be getting off of it and having financial freedom, but also somehow not caring about being wealthy simultaneously somehow. And it's like a bit of a paradoxical takeaway. Like, did you find people that were perceivably happy versus not? Like, what was the proportion of wealthy individuals that you met, at your level or above or whatever? Like, was it pretty much the same as, average Joe in terms of happiness level, or what were your takeaways there?
Well, I mean, studies have shown that people who are wealthier are happier and feel more satisfaction. So it's not even, the takeaway was more that everyone is they're still competing and they're still only looking up, right? So just to use a comparison, let's say you and I are sitting in Vancouver, Canada right now. And if you're born in Canada, you're in the top 5% of the world, right? But nobody spends time going, oh my God, I'm in the top 5%. Instead, they look within their own society, their own friend group, and they go, well, wow, that person has a nicer car than I do, or they have whatever. They're not comparing to someone living in a subsistence farming environment in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And I think that same thing occurs throughout society, right? And what I observed is when I started going and hanging out with really rich people, they were all comparing to one another. And I had this one experience where I was talking to a billionaire, and he was referring to another billionaire who was much, much richer than him. So single-digit billionaire versus a double-digit billionaire. So like someone worth 20 billion versus like 3. And he shakes his head and he goes, oh, that guy's so fucking rich. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're a billionaire. What can you not do? What can he do that you can't? And he looked a bit dejected and he just goes, well, he can buy a super yacht. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, so you can buy a crazy yacht and he can just buy a yacht that has a movie theater and 5 tennis courts. Like, that's insane, right? So you end up with these people where they're literally like, they have a friend of mine put it this way. He goes, they have an accounting hobby, right? They're literally just obsessing over zeros on the end. And there's all these weird little pecking order things where you'll talk to people and they'll be like, well, what model of Gulfstream do you have and how did you outfit it and all this other stuff. And so I just found that kind of bizarre. Like, I talked to one billionaire and they probably had a $50 million, $100 million house. And they pointed down the road and they went, yeah, the guy down the road's crazy. He spent $300 million. And I'm just like, this is insane. You have grandiose humility, right? Like, here you are throwing glasses in it or throwing stones in a glass house.
But did you find you were unique in that you were the one to recognize that and none of those successful people thought in the same way you did? Or is this like a systemic issue among all rich people? Or
I think everyone has it. I think that I have it for sure, and I still have it, right? I wrote a book about it, but it's not like I'm immune to this.
Because it was almost like the takeaway I got was almost that you had a realization that they had almost not arrived at themselves and you got there before they did in terms of segregating yourself from the outcome.
Totally. But I think, so I was driving the other day and I have a $100,000 Tesla, right? Pretty fancy, nice car by any measure. And I saw this guy drive by me with a convertible Rolls Royce. And I thought, well, that's just ridiculous, right? Now, the guy who's driving by me in a Volkswagen is looking at me in the Tesla and going, well, that's just ridiculous, right? And so I think there's just this, everybody is looking up and calling out everyone else, but we're all consuming, right? We're all doing this stuff. And really the message of the book is like, look, this never ends. There's no making that pit of anxiety go away, right? There's no amount of money in your bank account that's going to, remove your anxiety or depression or whatever problem you have. And I think it's like really taking a breath and saying, okay, well, what's the right thing to do, right? If you find yourself in a position where you do have a large amount of money, what should you do with it? What do we owe to society? Should we vilify these people or should we lionize them? Is this the reward that they receive for, giving society great companies, right? Like, we can all hate on Jeff Bezos, but we all use Amazon and it's pretty rad, right? There's something pretty awesome about pressing a button and a thing shows up at your door the next day really cheaply. We all use our iPhone, but you might think Steve Jobs was a jerk. There's just so many examples of this. And so it is a fundamental question of, are we going to allow these people, me being one of them, to receive this reward? And how much reward is okay, right? Like, we see lawyers driving like a fancy BMW. We understand. We kind of go like, okay, like, they made partner, they worked for 20 years. That was their silly reward for themselves. Is it okay if Jeff Bezos buys a super yacht if he then goes and gives 90% of his wealth away to charity? I don't know. And I don't know the answer to this after writing the book, but that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, because it's almost like there's a paradox in that the very thing that motivates you to the heights of exorbitant wealth to build big companies that employ many people and afford these opportunities and make cool stuff, it sort of is contingent on you having this like fucked up mindset to begin with. So even if you realize that and you kind of have this in mind that if you go down that road, it's never going to be fulfilling enough. Like, how do you make heads and tails of that? Or do you? And you just accept that this is how psychology works and you let it motivate you just the same.
Well, I think it's a little bit like dopamine. So if you take a dopaminergic drug like nicotine, for example, we all know you're going to smoke 1 cigarette and then 2 and then 4 and then 8, and you're going to have to keep going and getting a bigger and bigger dose to feel satisfied. And I think the only thing that works for drug addicts is self-binding, is limiting, saying you can't do that. And so what I'm trying to do is basically say,
don't make too much money.
No, not even that. I've actually basically publicly stated, look, I'm giving away at least 50%, probably way more than that. And in doing that, I feel like I've self-bound myself to say, now I have to live within those means. And it achieves that, right? It allows the addict in me to not kind of keep going and say, I'm going to keep feathering my nest. And then it also creates a positive byproduct from doing this, right? It's not really that positive if the story is, hey, I made this thing and I hired a bunch of people, made all this money, and then I made 10 generations of grandchildren rich and they all have polo ponies, right? That's not very exciting. I prefer the idea of that money going to something good. So for me personally, that's the decision I've made. But I still struggle with this, and I still get into situations where I feel my ego and wanting to make more and wanting to show it off. Like I got invited on a yacht, on $100 million super fancy yacht, and I was there with another guy. He had a public company, and he was kind of ignoring me. And then I said something about going public, and he was kind of interested. He was intrigued. He looked over and said, "Oh, you have a public company. What do you do?" And I explained what my business does. And then he goes, "What's the market cap?" And I was like, "Oh, it's about 800 million. And he was like, "Oh, cute." And it's like those moments I'm like, no, like I got to show that guy. I got to build a $10 billion company. And it's like, I mean, yeah, maybe I'll do that, but not for that reason, right? And that's the toxic, shitty part of me that wants to just make more and show off. And, I grew up in Vancouver around a lot of rich people, and I wasn't rich. I wasn't poor, but I was like, my parents were always struggling paycheck to paycheck. And I think being around that has always made me want to kind of show the rich kids that I can do it,
How much of the charitable philanthropy stuff that you see among the mega successful is actually genuine versus a ruse for tax breaks?
Well, I think there's some truth to the tax break stuff, but I think it's kind of like saying like,
both could be true.
Both can be true, right? I think that, who would say like, oh, look at all these people that have kids, but they're just selfishly doing it because it makes them feel good. And it's like, but it releases happy chemicals. Helping others helps you feel good, right? So there is like this selfish impulse as well.
Are there charities that are just fronts though, as charities, and are actually just like vehicles?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There's con artists. There's people. There was some guy years ago who was like, "Oh, I'm building schools in Africa," and then there's an author, John Krakauer, the guy who wrote Into Thin Air. He was donating to this guy, and then he heard that he was flying around on private jets, and he was like, "Well, that's weird. Maybe I'll investigate this." He flew to, I think it was India or wherever they said they were building these schools. Turns out the guy was just embezzling all the money, and it was all bullshit. So don't get me wrong, those exist. But you could say the same thing about business or YouTubers or anything. There's good people and bad people.
So have you read, I'm sure you've heard of this study from Princeton, High Income Improves Evaluation of Life but Not Emotional Well-Being. And it's a 2010 study, so obviously the number might be different now. But the analysis included over 450,000 responses to the Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index, a daily survey of 1,000 U.S. residents. And the analysis found that emotional well-being and life evaluation have different correlates. Income and education are more closely related to life evaluation, but health, caregiving, loneliness, and smoking are relatively stronger predictions of daily emotions. When plotted against income, life evaluation rises steadily. Emotional well-being also rises with income, but there is no further progress beyond an annual income of $75,000. So this stat, I think, has been relayed in the masses, above, maybe it's changed in the past 10 years, but often I hear, anything over $100,000 doesn't make you any happier. That's what you hear often. And it's almost a way to dissuade, to showcase that there's severe diminishing returns for the time investment, stress, etc., going above and beyond to do like the hyper aggressive, exorbitant wealth seeking behaviors. Do you think that's bullshit?
No, I don't think it's bullshit necessarily. I mean, certainly it's been true to my experience, right? I would say that my anxiety level decreased massively when I could afford to pay my rent and have a couple months of, cash in the bank, and probably around that 75, that was 10 years ago. So now maybe that number is like 150K or 200K. But I was making about that within the first few years of running the business. And I did feel, I felt myself unclench a little bit, and then I received no additional benefit, right? So, you buy your first car, it's awesome. Going from riding the bus to having your own car is freaking awesome. But going from a Volkswagen to a Tesla, it's fleeting, right? You get used to the Tesla very quickly. Going from a small, beautiful house to a bigger, beautiful house, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And so in my experience, one of the funny things that I always find is you talk to all these young entrepreneurs who haven't made any money, and they say, I want to be a billionaire. And I'm always like, you should really just want to be like 100,000-aire, right? Like you should really just try and focus on building a launch pad before you build a rocket, and just make a couple $100,000 a year, because ultimately that is what's going to pay off in terms of happiness. And I'd say that we were talking earlier about your YouTube audience, and that, you're in a place where you're getting recognized and it's pleasant and you're in a Goldilocks phase. But if you became like Mr. Beast, that would actually have negative consequences for you. You'd have to have security. You'd probably have stalkers. You'd be getting recognized constantly. You couldn't go out, all that stuff. And I think the same is true with wealth. You don't want to be so famous that everyone around you is trying to get your money. Your friends are weird with you. You can't relate to anybody. You have to worry about your personal security. You have stalkers. I mean, I relay some of these stories in my book, and I'm not that rich compared to, there's a lot of people that are way, way wealthier than I am and way more famous, and they have dealt with way crazier stuff. But I've gotten little tastes of this and realized that, oh my God, like I touched a hot stove. I don't want that.
So in hindsight, maybe you wouldn't have had control over this, but if you could be in the same position you are now as far as success metrics, but you've never had media published about transiently hitting billionaire status, would that have been preferable, where it's kept private?
Well, I'm a loudmouth. So that's the problem, is my default is to do this. I'm like a glutton for punishment, right? Like I remember
because people are chasing this title of sorts, because once you have, the article written about you that says this, even though most people don't have a conception of that, if you're a billionaire, you don't actually have $1 billion in your bank account probably, and it could be fleeting based on fluctuations in the market that are extremely volatile. It might have just been at that snapshot in time you were a billionaire, and it might have changed very quickly.
For me, there was an article written, I was labeled a billionaire. I was on Bloomberg, and I was like, what the fuck? I'm not a billionaire. And then it kind of started getting posted around a bunch of places. And I've been a billionaire, and I'm not a billionaire right now. But it's true. I mean, it's like a made up number at the end of the day. And very few people are just like sitting on $1 billion in the bank. I remember asking my dad, like, well, what's Bill Gates doing? Like, he's got gold bars in the bank and he has like $80 billion worth, right? Like,
it's just like Scrooge.
Yeah, exactly. You dive into your coins. Yeah, exactly.
Huh. Yeah, so it's funny because when people talk about millionaires in general, you would think you have $1 million after tax in your bank. But then when it comes to billionaire, it's like all this conceptual stuff that's not actually real and may never be realized ever, and likely won't. But that is what constitutes the billionaire status. Interesting. Yeah. So typical day for a billionaire, or, somebody who is at your...
I'm not a billionaire right now. And it's interesting is when I was a billionaire on paper, again, this is all on paper, but as a billionaire on paper, I was my least happy. I was feeling lost. I was feeling isolated. I wasn't seeing my friends. Like it was, I was working so hard to make money and run my businesses. And ironically, it was sapping my will to live. And I was feeling like anhedonia, right? So interestingly, the day in life of a billionaire is, and I know many, many billionaires, And there's very happy ones, and there's very miserable ones, and there's ones in between. I think it's like anyone else's life. You know, you smile at the barista, you have a conversation with your partner, you're annoyed with your kids, you know, it's all that stuff. And the only thing that's different about my life than anyone else's is I have a beautiful view, right? I live on the ocean. I live in a beautiful house. And when I travel, I fly in a private plane. But otherwise, you know, relatively the same as most people. Anyone running a business, I'm busy as hell. I've got a crazy calendar. I got a lot of email, but there's no there, right? I used to kind of be like, okay, well, when you're a billionaire, all life's problems just get abstracted away. And in fact, what happens is you have new problems. Now you have money to manage. Now you have to have this thing called a family office. You have to have wealth advisors and people who protect you and legal structures, and you have to give money to family and take care of people. You've got you got a business to run and a reputation to maintain. And I don't know, there's just suddenly more money, more problems. That really is true, right?
Did you get rid of all the excess? Because you mentioned in the book how you bought the exotic car to test what that's like. You had a penthouse in Vancouver. You had 2 extra properties on the island, I think. Did you get rid of all those?
Yeah, I mean, I went through this period where I was like, okay, I got rich. Now what? Because I'd lived under my means for a long time. And I was like, okay, I want to try and enjoy this and do all the crazy stuff. So I bought a supercar. I started chartering yachts, like doing all this crazy stuff. And at the end of the day, it was like, oh my God, this is so much worse, right? Like, why would I want to go on a yacht when I can just go to a nice hotel with my friends? Why would I want to be isolated in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by a bunch of terrified staff, right? That's like so weird. And, you know, when you own a bunch of houses, suddenly you've got a bunch of problems constantly coming at you. That becomes a full-time job, managing, you know, new roof, the gardener quit. Like, there's just constant problems. And so ultimately what I've come to is just that living a relatively simple life where you have a house, maybe one vacation home, and otherwise you don't do all that crazy stuff. Like even the car thing, right? I think a lot of men specifically think, oh, I'm going to buy this sweet car. Girls are going to love it and it's going to be awesome. My life's going to be great. Then you buy one and you're like, wow, this car is like so much less comfortable than any car I've ever driven. Only 65-year-old men want to hit on me, right? Because they're all like, oh my God, what kind of car is that? Like, they're, you know, those are the guys you talk to. And when people see you, they're not thinking, wow, that guy's cool. They're going, fuck that guy. What a douche, right? And so I just realized, I was like, I don't want any of that.
How has your approach to acquisitions changed since inception of Tiny, if at all? Like, I've seen certain people who are, you know, sort of following the same model that started by buying, you know, minority stakes in businesses, and now they won't even bother with a deal if it's not a majority controlling stake for 51% plus. Like, how do you guys look at this stuff now?
So we always want to have control, and we always want to make sure that we're totally aligned with what the founder wants. Because if let's say the founder continues to run it, and we have misaligned ideas about what should happen, it can create a lot of conflict. Generally, what we're looking for is a business that is growing revenue, profitable, has happy employees and happy customers, is doing something positive in the world. It doesn't have to be exciting. It could be something really, really boring. And that we feel that we can grow over time. And I think some of the mistakes we've made have been kind of in 2 buckets. One is getting attracted by cheap things. So buying something that's really cheap. Well, usually if something's really cheap, there's a reason for it. It's usually a sack of garbage and you should watch out. And I've realized over time that it's much better to buy really high quality businesses. So, you know, there's been businesses that we've bought where we haven't paid very much money and they've done really well for us financially, but they've been incredibly stressful. You're always worrying if they're going to keep going or what's going to happen. And then on the flip side, there's businesses like Letterboxd or AeroPress where I go, yeah, this is a wonderful business. It just keeps growing at a crazy rate. It's doing something that the world needs. It has a protective moat that enables it to, or a business model that enables it to continue to persist. And so I've learned over time to pay up for quality. The other mistakes that we've made have been around people and judgment. So we have, there's a great Buffett quote, you can't do a good deal with a bad person. And we've in the past, only like 1 or 2 times, we've done deals where we've said, well, we don't really like this founder, but they're not going to be in the picture. That's okay. You know, we get heebie-jeebies when we talk to them, but well, it's okay. We'll be running their business. And every time we've done that, we've lost all our money, both times. And one, it was fraud. Actually, both, it was kind of fraud.
Jeez. So assuming a controlling stake is in general, like it sounds like it's not always achieved via just the percentage on paper owned. Like you could have a minority, a controlling minority, and still control the company, even though percentage wise it's less than 50%.
I mean, it's like, it gets so complicated, right? Because it's like, we're a weird structure, right? Where it's like, we have the public company and then we have this fund underneath, and the fund, you got to remember the fund is buying a majority stake, and we just control all the investors' money.
Is that a typical or an atypical approach?
Very typical. So it's like, that's like when you hear the word private equity, they do this. They have a fund. They go to you, you know, some rich guy, and they say, hey, give me $1 million. They do that with 100 other rich guys. They say, all right, we're going to go invest all this money for 10 years. You'll get your money back in the next 5 to 10 years. For that time, we control it. We're going to go buy a bunch of businesses, and then we're going to take a cut of the profits that you guys make. That's literally what we have done with that fund.
So it's like you basically sell people on the idea of here's what you'll probably get return-wise, and you don't have to do any work. You just need to put up money, and we'll handle it all, and we control it.
Totally.
Huh. Okay, interesting on buying and selling stuff. Warren Buffett just sold a bunch of Apple recently, and apparently it's because he thinks there's a high likelihood the corporate tax rate could go up imminently. And obviously in Canada, there's, you know, all this commotion or, you know, concern around the capital gains inclusion rate just jumped as well. And it seems like there's a shift in corporate tax in general, or potentially imminently, at least in the US and definitely in Canada. How do you perceive somebody who you framed a lot of your strategy around tactically for your holdco, Warren, being almost going against what he typically would say, which is just hold stuff, have great companies, hold them, and don't sell?
Quick interruption to bring you a note from one of today's sponsors, Gorilla Mind. Pre-workouts, cognitive enhancing nootropics, energy drinks, even protein bars now. We're pretty broad spectrum at this point, but with formulations that reflect a rigorous standard, because I literally make everything. So, you know, typically when you buy from a supplement company, there will be, you know, the face of the company, there'll be a formulator behind the scenes, there'll be an owner of the company. There's a bunch of different cogs in the machine, but very infrequently will you find somebody who is intimately involved in product development and is the one making the content surrounding the education of the products, and is also overseeing R&D, and is also the owner of the company. Like, I am intimately involved with this, and I think it's reflected in the quality of the formulations and also the innovation behind them. Like, we pride ourselves on innovation, and I think it shines through in a lot of our products. You know, the unique active ingredient inclusions in the energy drinks, for example, which also taste exceptional. The unique approach to high stim pre-workout, energy shots, you know, the most comprehensive energy shot in the entire market. Today, we have a Black Friday sale, so felt it was worth having Gorilla Mind be a sponsor of today's pod as well. 50% off on our protein bars. These are absolutely delicious. I have one of these a day. Energy shots. These are essentially our energy drink formula compressed into a shot that you can take on a plane, take on the go. A lot more portable, and you can just slam in 2 seconds. And then also our base offering pre-workout that mixes exceptionally well, tastes incredible, and is suitable for newbies as well as veterans alike, with 10 grams citrulline, 2.5 grams of betaine, L-tyrosine to backfill dopamine synthesis, cholinergics. Like, this thing is, I think, only $17.50 right now with 50% off, which is nuts for a comprehensive, good quality pre-workout. And then everything else on the site is 30% off. So whether it be our new, you know, high stim lightning formula pre-workout, which I'm going to do a comprehensive breakdown on soon, Gorilla Mode, the flagship of the brand, the main comprehensive pre-workout that is essentially the Swiss Army knife of the company. Have a 4-hour video, I believe, on this product that I put out relatively recently. I think it was 4 hours. Yeah, that was a doozy, man. Gorilla Mode Nitric, the stim-free, among an array of other products, including things that people probably don't even know that I've spent months developing, like our Elite Multivitamin or our Omega-3 Elixir, which is, I would say, almost like the pinnacle example of a high-quality fish oil product on the market right now. Like, it's up there with the big dogs, and I think the innovation in the formulation itself actually edges it out. And then it has the rancidity and oxidation testing to really back up its quality. It's published on the product page, which no one is really doing. Yeah, like there's a full suite of other products, unique ones at that a lot of people don't even know we carry. And they're all 30% off. So gorillamind.com, use code MPMD to save. And the deals won't last. Like something like this. Oh yeah, we're literally giving away a free box of the Gorilla Bars if you buy over $125 of stuff, and it's free shipping as well. Like, the deals are pretty nuts. I don't think we've ever done a sale this aggressive, so here I am talking about it. So if you want to check it out, you want to stock up, or perhaps you've been on the fence about trying something for the first time, now would be the time. Even stuff as basic as micronized creatine monohydrate, you can probably get a pretty sweet deal right now when you try something that you've been on the fence about or looks interesting. So if it were me, I would highly recommend, trying our flagship pre or our entry level for 50% off. This one tastes the best because it's I suppose, not as stacked as our flagship, but it's a great start if you're a newbie. And then I'm going to go on a tangent about everything. So check it out. Link in the description below. Code MPMD, and back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Well, the counterbalance to that might be that Buffett may be looking at the entire market and saying, whoa, this is, the numbers are getting crazy. Apple's valuation is insane. It doesn't make sense. And he might be selling simply to build a cash pile. He already does have a huge cash pile. So I can't speak to tax. I know him and Charlie Munger have always said, it's foolish to optimize for tax. Don't worry about that. Let compounding take care of you. It's really interesting. I mean, I have a lot of friends and they whine about the corporate tax, and I think it's...
And in which country are they complaining?
In Canada, because it just went up.
Which friend is that?
And in the States. I mean, everyone complains about it, but it's funny. I mean, if you think about, like, I can see both sides, right? So let's imagine a world where someone is a lawyer and they get paid $300,000 a year. As soon as they get paid, the day they get paid their monthly paycheck, that gets cut in half, and when they pay taxes, right? Whereas let's say there's a lawyer who's actually an entrepreneur, they have their own company. Well, they can make the money up here in their holding company. They don't pay tax. They only pull out the amount they need to live on and pay tax on that. And the rest of it, they get to go buy Apple stock and compound it for 10 years and basically have it's almost like a TFSA or an RRSP in a holding company. And I think that's what they're trying to get around. But then on the flip side, I also think that there's a lot of entrepreneurs who work for 10 years to build their business, never take any money out of it, and their only real liquidity event is selling their company. And I think it's unfair to those people. And so I think it's this delicate balance of like, look, I'm fine to be taxed for consumption. If I go and I take my money out of the economy and I go and spend it on a yacht, tax the hell out of me. I don't want to incentivize that behavior across all of society. But if you're stimulating the economy and creating jobs, don't disincentivize people from taking risk and building businesses and making money that way. And I think it's a bit of a hard problem. And I think there's a lot of politics around it. I think a lot of it is for show. But I mean, the corporate tax rate, I think the corporate or the personal income tax rate used to be like 80% in certain brackets. So it's not like the world stops. It just sucks for a while.
Hopefully it doesn't suck more though. Because at some point.
For you, you're not taking the money out anyway, so you don't need to worry about it. But if you ever decide you want to go buy a Fabergé egg collection, then, you're going to get taxed.
Or get groceries.
Yeah, sure.
So you posted on Twitter about, hey, just a heads up, Canada's capital gains inclusion rate's going up. If you want to fire sale your company, we're, open for biz. Has anything come from that?
Yeah, actually, we've looked at probably 20 different companies. I don't know that today we've actually done any. If anyone wants to sell their company in Canada, I think the rate jumps, June 25th or something like that. So We'll see if anything comes of it. But we just copied Buffett. Buffett did that in the 70s when the tax rate jumped.
And he's not doing that. Interestingly, so he said, or at least I'm pretty sure, I could be misquoting, but the likelihood of corporate tax going up is the reason why he sold Apple stock recently, potentially with the reason.
I doubt he would ever say that publicly, by the way.
Okay. It was like...
He's very proud about how much tax he pays.
Huh.
And he always makes this point. He goes, it's not fair that I'm taxed at a lower rate than my secretary, right? And that's mostly because of capital gains.
Because how come he's not saying that right now, if that's even on his radar at all?
I don't think he thinks about it, honestly. I think he thinks in like decades or 100-year periods. I don't think that...
Well, then how come in the 70s he said, if you want to sell your company, tax rates, you're not...
Because I think that's an incentive for some people, right? But I think he's comfortable with paying a lot of tax.
Sure, but I was saying like now it seems like a viable time for him to do what he did in the 70s again, if there's like an imminent jump potentially.
Well, and I think that now he doesn't want to draw attention to that because he's so positive about tax rates. He's spoken quite publicly about how he thinks the tax rate should be higher. So I think if he starts going out and saying, hey, sell your business to me, then I think it might look bad because he's publicly saying they should be higher. He's the master of PR, right? Like he never says anything controversial. He's very careful.
Makes sense. So you've mentioned how, you have friends who complain about the corporate tax rate, and I asked about what country they're in. And yeah, like obviously we both know people are successful in the US and Canada, and I've asked you many times, and that's part of, I think it was actually the reason I reached out to you, is about Canadian taxes and exit tax and things of that nature. You told me, and this actually gave me quite a bit of comfort at the time that I was making the right call to stay here. You said BC is, you want to stay here, don't optimize just for tax. And to the degree where people are moving to like Puerto Rico and living places they don't actually want to live, I could totally get how it makes no sense to do that. When you have stuff like, the capital gains inclusion rate jumping, luxury taxes, taxes across the board, like at what point is there a threshold at which you're like, it's a little bit too ridiculous now and it would have been better to be elsewhere? Or like what is it about here specifically that is so great to you that nowhere else has that it's worth justifying?
Well, I think Canada is a wonderful place. It's not, incredible natural beauty, tons of space, wonderful people, much less violence than a lot of other places, a much more equal society, more multiculturalism. I mean, there's a lot to like here, right? I think like if you move to LA, let's say, yeah, you might pay like literally you'll probably pay like 3% less tax, or maybe you might have a few little advantages.
Pick a different state.
But literally you might imagine, Austin, wherever,
sure,
maybe it's 10%, right?
Okay.
And that's a lot of money. But, you're going to be worrying about like someone breaking into your house with a gun. Like my friend Sam, he had a guy show up with a baseball bat at his house, right? Like I've never experienced violence in any form in Canada. I mean, yeah, bar fights and stuff like that, but I haven't like...
What about the dude in the book?
Well, that wasn't violence. That was just like a really crazy thing to do, right? Like it's creepy, right? So I heard another story about a guy who lived in LA and, a guy broke into his house and he got a gun and they wrestled with the gun and the guy held it to his head and pulled the trigger and it misfired. Like, I mean, again, these are just stories, but for me personally, I just love it here. I grew up here. My family here is my family's here. My friends are here. It would take a lot for me to move. Yeah, if it became like a communist dictatorship, I would probably leave. But if the tax rate goes up by 20%, I don't think I would leave. I'm not that motivated by my after-tax income. That's not my focus.
You're my last hope for this area that it's still the place to be. So, because I'm pretty stuck here as well. So my family's here. I don't want to move. So I hope it to be the case that things improve or don't get worse.
Well, you said something interesting. We had the interview before this, and you said you're not spending much money. Maybe you want to, right? So sure, you'll pay some tax or whatever. But also, you do this because the journey is the reward. It's enjoyable. You do it anyway, right? Like, you don't strike me as someone who's super motivated by money, right? You're not driving a ridiculous car. You're not flying around in helicopters and owning 3 mansions. Why optimize for tax, right? That the only thing that it affects is actually and it's really just when the money gets to you, that's when you pay for it. That's when you get the tax. And so if you're not bringing the money to yourself and you're using it to spend, buy stupid stuff,
Hey,
you don't pay the tax.
I think the thing that eats at me the most about it is not necessarily that. It is more even your reinvestment capacity via not having things like QSBS exemption. Hearing that you could make, $10+ million tax free for the exact same endeavor. Like, it's so much.
We have, we're getting into like Canada boring stuff, but like we have TFSAs.
My God.
We have
TFSAs.
$2 million capital gains exemption. Like, there's all these things that we have
For one time in your life.
We have something called SHRED, where the government will literally give you 25% of anyone you employ doing technological research just back. There's tons of benefits of being in Canada, right? Like, I think for every pro, there's a con. And in the States, for every pro there's a con. Like, it just, at the end of the day, like, I don't know that lifestyle-wise, at least, the United States is better. And I think that from a business standpoint, I don't think that operating the type of business I operate here, I'm in no way negatively affected by being in Canada. Now, would that be true if I ran a Silicon Valley kind of startup? Yeah, it would suck to be in Vancouver. There's no investors. There's nobody. Everyone does real estate, right? But I don't do that. It doesn't matter.
See, it's crazy. Everyone does real estate here, is what you're saying?
That's where most of the money comes from.
See, that's the crazy thing too, is because I guess when you have these high rises, it makes sense if you're part of some like mega project that it's profitable, but like just actual real estate that people use as a vehicle of reinvestment in the States, the way they conceive it is much different, I think, than here, where you can't even really make your money back on a basic mortgage with rent.
Well, you got to remember that this is the third most expensive market for housing in the entire world. Vancouver is number 3. It's like higher, I think, than Manhattan.
What's number 2 and 1?
I think it's like Singapore and may even be Melbourne, Australia or something. Don't quote me on this, but it's something like that. And so when we're at an all-time high, you can't go buy a building and make money off it. But if you bought a building at any point, a building or a house at any point in the last 30 years in Vancouver, you've held it. You've made an astounding amount of money. So it's like we're just in a moment right now at the time where you've had enough money to go buy buildings. They're not selling for good prices. That'll change. At some point, maybe in the next 5-10 years, you'll be able to buy a building in Vancouver for a good rate, I'm sure.
It's like my perception is it's essentially unaffordable to live here for an average person at this point.
It's insane.
To where I don't even understand how it's sustainable for 90% of people to be here. Like, you're still optimistic about its future?
Well, that's a whole separate issue. And I feel really passionately that the government should not permit building. I mean, think about why is it so expensive? There's a couple of reasons, but one is, obviously foreign investors came and pumped up prices. There's definitely an element of that. But really, you have a problem of supply and demand. You have excess demand. You have more people moving to Canada, specifically Vancouver and Toronto, and they want housing. And the government has this artificial limit on how many houses can be built. Did you know it takes like 6 to 12 months to get a permit in most places in BC? Just a permit. If you're in Dallas, Texas, you can build a house the moment you buy the piece of land. You just start building. And as long as you build it according to their rules, you're good. So I had a friend, I built a house in Victoria. I bought the property in 2016. My friend Marshall bought a property in Dallas in 2016. And I said, when are you expecting to be done? And he said, about a year. And I was 5 years and he was done in, I believe, 9 months. It's crazy. The cost of building and permitting is insane. So I think there's a lot of different reasons why it is the way it is. But people, it's kind of like with addiction. It's like no one changes unless they break. You got to hit rock bottom. And I think the same thing is true with this housing market and all these other problems. I think that things need to crash and explode, and then there'll be some radical changes. So am I bullish? I mean, Am I bullish on this being a wonderful place to live? Absolutely. Am I bullish on this being a place where real estate is affordable or a good investment? Absolutely not. In fact, I'm not bullish. I'm actually I own some houses. I own 2 houses, but I actually bought a short on those houses because I'm so concerned about Canadian real estate values, and I want to make sure I'm hedged. So that's how bearish I am on Canadian real estate.
You short your own house. Like, how's that?
There's funds that bet against the Canadian real estate market, and you can buy into them to hedge your exposure. So I'm not trying to make money if the market goes down. I'm just trying to make sure I don't lose money on the value of my house.
So would you recommend that for any entrepreneur who has property here?
No, I mean, it's like proceed with caution, right? Shorting stocks, debt, all these things, they require high risk tolerance.
Huh. Yeah. How many? So it's not like, at least I'm not familiar with many hyper successful entrepreneurs that come from Canada. You know, I could think on one hand, you know, the Shopify guys, you, like, I don't know, a couple other people maybe. I don't know that many that exist. Presumably there's a decent amount more. The Lululemon guy, whatever. Of the people you know, because presumably you know most of them, probably personally, how many of them share your perspective on, if you even know the answer to this, of like having, in hindsight, set up their businesses here, living here? Have any of them expressed that they wish they got out and went to the US, or are they all pretty like just content with?
No, I've never heard that from anyone. I mean, I think Toby at Shopify has been loudly complaining, and I agree with a lot of what he's saying on Twitter about the government and the taxation system and all that stuff, and some of the attitudes. I think Canada, it can be a bit sleepy, right? And I think it's sleepy for a good reason. So in Victoria, where I live, one of the complaints about tech companies is that, you know, nobody's built like $1 billion tech company there, right? These venture-backed startups, they always seem to sell for $5, $10, $15 million. You know, the founder gets 8 years in and then sells it, or they sell to an American company or whatever. And I think a lot of what drives that is that you can live a really fucking good life for $5 or $10 million in Victoria, or even in Vancouver, right? If you have that much money, you know, you can buy a great house, buy a great car, put your kids in a great school, and you can live a reasonable life. Obviously, that number goes up over time. I think the downside of being in Canada is that you're not surrounded by top performers in all areas of life. There are top performers here, but it's kind of like that saying, you're the sum of your 5 best friends. And I think when you're surrounded by entrepreneurs who are selling their company for $5 or $10 million, then you go, okay, great, I'll sell my company for $5 or $10 million. I'm not going to shoot for a multi-billion-dollar outcome. And so that's why I think so few people do. But I think that's also kind of why it's a nice place to be, right? Do you really want to be competing with a bunch of billionaires and crazy people in LA and New York?
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was like, you know, some point where at a level of success, a lot of them are like, what am I doing with my company and corporation in Canada? I should reposition it to more favorably take advantage of tax incentives in the US or whatever.
I mean, I know people that do all sorts of crazy stuff to avoid tax, right? But at the end of the day, I think most people like being here. You know, it is a really, really nice place.
If you were to pick 3 places that aren't Victoria to live anywhere in the world, factoring in everything that comes along with it, tax, environment, weather, whatever, where would you pick?
I think I would live in Maui,
Okay.
Auckland, or San Diego.
Okay.
Maui, because it's insanely beautiful and I love it. I just love it there. It's a faraway place, annoying, but it's probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. New Zealand, incredibly beautiful, democracy, great people, very unique, incredible nature. What was in San Diego, good beaches, good infrastructure, no traffic, all the benefits of LA without the downsides.
Do you see you're a beach guy?
I personally love quiet and I love nature. Yeah. I've realized I spent my 20s spending all this time going to big cities like New York and London and Chicago and stuff. And I just realized over time that they're all kind of the same. And so now when I travel, I really love seeing like majestic beauty. So either I'm going somewhere to learn or to meet someone, and then I'll go to a big city. But otherwise, I just want to go somewhere beautiful. I want to go think. I want to learn. I want to see nature.
So do you go do all like the obscure hikes and stuff in like Squamish and up to Sea to Sky, all the little side areas where you can find those secluded, insane views?
A little bit, but I'm not like a total outdoorsman or anything. I just like being amongst quieter places, you know? I think it affords you like independence of thought. Like Buffett always talks about being in Omaha, Nebraska, right? There's something about being away from the fray that allows you to do what you authentically want to do instead of what other people want you to do.
Starting from scratch, if you were to have to go back to day one, obviously the current, status of the internet, entrepreneurship, opportunities, it's a little bit different than, things that stood out as obvious, low-hanging fruit, gaping opportunities, perhaps when you first started with agencies or what have you. If you were to be a broke 20-something again and start from scratch, how would you make your first $1 million?
So entrepreneurship is just solving problems, right? So I would look for a problem. I think there's that great show, Undercover Billionaire. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
It's kind of silly, but they'll basically take a super rich guy, they'll drop him in the middle of nowhere with a truck and like $200 and be like, okay, go make $1 million.
I thought it was he goes into his own company and acts like an employee. Or is that a different show?
That's Undercover Boss.
Oh.
Yeah. Undercover Billionaire is, hey, can you really, basically the argument is like, are you just naturally good at this? You had some crazy advantage, or do you actually have these skills to make money? And, if you think about it, the people that are successful, all they do is they find a problem and they figure out an elegant way to solve it, right? So there's a guy that I know named Peter Kaufman, and he owns an aerospace parts manufacturer. And I asked him this exact same question. And he said, I would just go to auto body shops and, airplane hangars, anywhere where they need parts. And I would just say, what part is the most annoying to source? What's the one that shows up the slowest, breaks the most often, or is unreliable in some way? And then I would just figure out that one part and I'd solve it. And I'd start going to all the different providers and just do a better job of providing it. And that's what he did. That's his business. That's why he's giving that recommendation. But I think that's really the kind of North Star of entrepreneurship. You're really just saying like, there's got to be a better way, right? That stupid infomercial refrain of, you're in black and white, you cut your finger. I think there's something to that. And when I look at what I would do if I got dropped in a city, well, I would go into a bunch of businesses and I'd start asking them questions about what their problems are and how I can solve them. And maybe it's that I go into a restaurant and they say, well, no, we hate cleaning our grease trap and it's super annoying and the guy never shows up, right? Maybe I start a grease trap cleaning business. I don't know. But just finding that niche where you can find, riches and niches. I just use niche and niche, but you get the idea.
Yeah. Huh. So in general, like you would have to trade your time for money for a while until you've built up something, and you would just kind of like info collect until something stood out to you as an obvious trend of here's a need that needs addressing.
Totally. And I think the best ones are the ones you understand deeply yourself. So like for example, like I have often solved my own problems by starting a business and then realizing that within that business, there's not a good piece of software to do X, Y, Z. So for example, we helped Sam Harris monetize his podcast and build his meditation app. And we realized there was a need for good software when people wanted to do what Peter does and have, click here to subscribe to keep listening. They needed software to power that. We built a software company called Supercast as a result. And because we understood that problem so intimately, because we'd been in that business, we could build the perfect piece of software to solve that problem, right? And to me, like that's what you're looking for.
So, in the world of entrepreneurship / self-improvement, motivation, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of content that exists on like top ways to make your first $10,000 as a, brand new guy to entrepreneurship. And it's often the same stuff you'll hear like drop shipping, and here's how you do it. Agency, this is what I don't even know what agencies like really. I don't know what people are pushing people into when they say agencies nowadays. And what do you see as viable, kind of like cookie cutter opportunities that are less about having some unique knowledge? Because it's easy to say, I'll become, identify a problem, but there's not necessarily a guarantee that your brute force time investment would solve that problem, presumably at a higher level than they could just outsource themselves. Like, what are kind of the lowest hanging fruit things that exist now in 2024 you think somebody could reliably, with time investment, make good money on?
Well, ultimately, that depends on your skill set. And I think that the biggest skill in business is to figure out what's the lazy way to do something. Mm-hmm. So, I think that what you want to do is try and find something where you're not selling your time ultimately, right? Like, you might have to at first. It could be mowing lawns, right? Let's just use that as an example. So you find the richest part of town and you walk door to door and you say, hey, I've got a lawnmower. Can I mow your lawn for $100? Once you get 10 doors, then you can go, okay, now I'm going to hire another guy. I'm going to get paid $30. I'm going to pay the other guy $17. He's going to mow those lawns. I'm just going to email them and make sure they get their payment or whatever. And then slowly but surely you build that into a business. And if you look at like what I did, I started building websites for little businesses, and then I slowly worked my way up. I slowly hired people, and I found that arbitrage where I could have other people doing the work, and I could just be selling the work and coordinating the work and eventually not even running the company and still make the money from that. So you're trying to construct a system for solving a problem for other people that makes enough money that you have profit at the end of the day.
So that is an agency, MetaLab, the first company?
That was the original. And that was started at, me in my underwear in my apartment, one-man shop, who is, designer, coder, salesman, project manager. And then within a couple years, it was me just doing sales and a bunch of other people doing all those jobs. And then over time, I had a CEO and I just abstracted it away.
And do you think that still agencies in particular are still a viable model for a successful business? Because I see often, seemingly, and perhaps this is a misjudgment, but a lot of entrepreneurs that are seen as gurus will tell you how they got rich and then tell you about, their agency or whatever. But the real way they got really rich is
by selling
the course on how they made a few $100K or something.
Yeah.
Is that a viable business model for a lot of people, you think, to wrap their heads around and be successful at? Or is it something that's just hyper-saturated?
So there's this guy, Grant Cardone. And what Grant Cardone does for a living is he goes to big arenas and hotel ballrooms and he says, pay me $1,000 and I'll teach you how to get rich. It's easy. You just go buy real estate. That's what I did. Now, I don't know if he made much money from the real estate, but I know he made a shitload of money by selling people the idea of how to make money from that. I think that you can't combine those two things. Both are true. You can make money doing real estate, but you probably don't want to listen to the guy who's telling you how to do it, who's making you pay him $1,000 in a hotel ballroom, right? So I think all the things you mentioned, drop shipping, agencies, there's a gazillion businesses, all can be successful if you're smart and you operate it well, but you don't want to be listening to charlatans. The sure sign of a charlatan is they want you to pay them a whole bunch of money for advice. And it's a little bit like getting like a life coach, right? Like, if someone's a life coach, they don't have their shit figured out themselves as far as I'm concerned, right? Like there's those who can do, and then there's those who teach, but you rarely get both, right?
So I like the fact that you're willing to actually point out a real life example of somebody that does this. Are there any others that are standout that you would be like, if you've been consuming their content and otherwise think this is a trustworthy resource coming from somebody who's actually successful through legitimate means, would you say steer clear of certain prominent people online?
Perhaps someone who shares knowledge. Ty Lopez.
I have a friend who paid him very recently, I think $60,000 for consulting about life.
No.
And the biggest takeaway was Ty convincing him that it's the money in your bank account is not worth hyper-focusing on getting as high as possible, when it's like, you know, how hypocritical is that for him to say? But like, it's just wild how they are still able to convince people at scale to pay them for stuff they themselves have unsuccessfully, seemingly.
I mean, you mentioned Napoleon Hill earlier. There's a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and a lot of entrepreneurs really love it. But it turns out Napoleon Hill was totally full of shit. He never interviewed Andrew Carnegie. I don't think he interviewed any of the people, and he was a known grifter and con man, right? But that book was exciting, and a lot of people read it, and there's good ideas in it, right? I'm sure Grant Cardone probably says some stuff that's true. It's just you don't need to pay him $1,000. You can go and you can just go buy a book or you can go buy a book from a bookstore, go to the library, or go on the internet and learn everything you need to. There's so many of these guys that are full of shit, and women, I'm sure too, but it's insane.
Do you ever think a How to Get Rich course is worth it, or is it typically just a red flag?
It's a total red flag. And I think that there's so many wonderful books. I mean, the one I referenced at the beginning of this interview, there's go read How to Get Rich. You know, you can go to the library and get that for free, or you can buy it for $15. That'll tell you everything that you need to know. And the wonderful thing about that book is it's actually a book about why you don't want to get rich. He actually in the book says, I wish that I'd quit. Instead of getting super rich and doing it until I was 70, I wish that I'd quit at 35 and become a poet, because that's what he actually wanted to be. So it's like this fascinating book from so many other perspectives. One thing I was going to say, when it comes to idea generation or finding a business, Charlie Munger has this great saying. He says, you want to fish where the fish are, right? And what he means by that is you don't want to go, if let's say that there's two ponds, there's one pond where there's a bunch of fish. Everyone knows there's a lot of fish. There's opportunity, but there's hundreds of fishermen and they're all elbowing into each other and using different lures. And there's a lot of people competing for those fish. Or if you just walk for 10 minutes off to the side in the middle of the forest, there's a really quiet fishing hole and there's only like one other sleepy fisherman. That's where you want to fish. You don't want to be fishing in a competitive market. And so I think the advice I give people, to go back to that idea of there being riches and niches, the boring businesses are where you can make the most money, right? The businesses where people wake up every day and go, oh, I should make that. That's sexy. That's exciting. Like restaurants, fashion brands, like consumer packaged goods, like all that stuff. It's a bad business because it's complicated, but also hyper competitive because everyone competes with you, right? In software, it's to-do list software. Everyone makes to-do list software. There's always new competitors. You know what makes a lot of money though? Like crematoriums, right? Garbage disposal, fence rental companies, glass makers. My friend Brent owns a company and they make the, what is it? It's like at a fair, the merry-go-round. They make merry-go-rounds. They sell them to fairs. Nobody wakes up and goes, I'm going to start a merry-go-round company, right? Those are the companies that you want to own. Those are the businesses that are wonderful because no one else is competing with you. And that's what I mean by finding these weird niche problems that a lot of entrepreneurs think they have to be passionate about what they're doing. I don't necessarily think they do. I think they should just find a boring problem and solve it, and then make a bunch of money and then decide what their passion is. Go do the passion after you've got the launch pad. That's when you build the rocket.
Have you ever looked much into Bernard Arnault and his empire? And I'm assuming it's very unrelatable for like your skill set maybe. So that's why you identify more with like the Berkshire Hathaway kind of structure where they get more like obvious, you're very, boring businesses that are just, heavy hitters kind of thing. It's hard to ignore the upside of having that luxury factor and that prestige. And he is, the richest guy on the planet, I guess, right now. Do you have any thoughts on LVMH and just that empire as a whole?
Well, I think he's really the Warren Buffett of Europe. He's like Warren Buffett if he dressed really well. They call him the wolf in cashmere. And I think that he's identified the same thing that Warren Buffett ultimately did, which is you want to buy businesses that can exist for 50 or 100 years. And many of the fashion houses and brands that he's acquired have persisted for a very, very long time. And they're wonderful businesses. If you protect the brand, then you can grow them significantly. You can hold them for the long term. You can sleep at night. And if you look at it, he's done the exact same thing Buffett has, just in a different industry. He's just chosen luxury goods and Tiffany and, what else does he own? Louis Vuitton and all that stuff, right? Like he's just doing the same thing in a different world.
Do you have any like trends in that world, or is it more like the tech kind of?
Not really. No, not my world.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating to me seeing the like how that has exploded since, I don't know, whatever, the 60s or 70s. Like he acquired Dior, I believe, and it was like a huge sum of money for the time, and it was just mind-boggling to think that somebody at that age, with the lack of, I don't know, like there's just like so much less you can do flexibility-wise back then to make that much money. And it's just like seeing him ramp that up over time and then have this giant like house of brands underneath him. It's pretty wild. And it seems like the thing that is weird to me though is the revenue is so insane with such extreme margin, but I don't actually know, and I guess I don't get out of the house as much as maybe I should, but like I don't actually see anyone really wearing it. Am I just not in the right area?
They just not
like,
hang out in downtown Vancouver. There's definitely a lot of people wearing that stuff.
Huh.
Yeah.
And what do you know? What demographic? Like really rich people, are they all trying to come across as unassuming? I'm just a regular guy, kind of.
You get both. So it's funny. My business partner Chris, we talk about grandiosity and grandiose humility. So you get both. So you get the people who say, they live in $100 million house and they flaunt their wealth in crazy ways and they wear a $300,000 watch. And then I know other people who they drive a Honda Civic and they wear a Casio watch and they remind you that they could, but they don't. Right. And it's like,
it almost seems like a trend now to be the guy who's like, I'm just another bro,
100%.
But I'm rich as fuck.
Exactly. And I think it's something like, do you want to rub it in someone's face or do you want to rub how pious you are in everyone's face? Right. You kind of get one or the other. And I think being somewhere in the middle is probably okay, but I don't know.
So one thing I did want to touch on before we finish is just lifestyle, not necessarily spending money, but just like day-to-day scheduling, productivity. Like how many hours per week do you work on average now versus when you were, I don't know, like how has that changed over time? Like it used to be just probably never, like every waking hour essentially is work, and then it transitioned over time to less, or how has that changed?
So I've been really consistent in this. I work 4 to 6 hours a day at most, always, forever, but I'm always on, right? So I've always got my phone and I'm always checking in and I'm always sending texts and coordinating, but my actual work time is usually about 4 to 6 hours. And so in my 20s, when I was running my business, I was doing all the wrong things. I was drinking, partying, I was waking up at 2, working till 5, and then going out for dinner with friends and stuff. And I just realized that you can really pack a lot of productivity into a relatively short period of time. Now, what has changed for me is I used to do that. I'll do 3 hours of work then, but then 1 or 2 nights a week, I'd stay up till 5 in the morning and do a bunch of stuff. And now I have kids, so I just can't do that. It's not on the table. So I would say probably work the same kind of 4 or 5 hours a day. And then I'm checking my phone. But what's different is I don't do any work after 5. I never check my work texts. I don't send emails. I never look at Slack. I have a rule. I don't even allow myself to be part of a Slack. I don't actually do email anymore. So I have my assistant put any email that needs a response in a Google Doc. And then I write on the Google Doc a couple times a week, but I don't do any of those things. So the nice thing about where I'm at today is that I'm able to be at a high enough level that I don't have to deal with problems day to day. But when you're running a business, like you're still very much actively managing your businesses, you kind of have to, when a fire is burning, you have to jump in.
Yeah. 5 hours. Wow. So let's just say you wake up. What time do you wake up and what are you doing from wake up until sleep?
So wake up at 7, get the kids ready, have a coffee. If I'm really lucky and I've got 15 minutes, I'll have a coffee, sit on my back patio, and I live on the water, so I can just look out at the water, watch the sunrise, depending on the time of year, get the kids to school. And then usually I come back to my house, do a workout. I've got a personal trainer. So the personal trainer comes, I do an hour-long weightlifting session usually.
So you have a full gym in your house?
I have a gym in my house in the basement. And then I will go to a cafe or go to my office, and I'll do, probably 2 hours of meetings. And then I'll do another hour of kind of random texting and emailing and checking in and reading materials and stuff.
Do you do 2 hours of meetings in a cafe? Isn't that like super loud?
Well, I'll go outside or I'll go to my office. Like or I'll go for a lunch. Like, so a lot of the time I'm meeting people in person. One thing I've done lately is I get a lot of people wanting to meet me. And so I say, I'll meet you if you come to Victoria. And I've been surprised people have. So that's been kind of cool. So I'll do in-person meetings with people. Or if I have a board meeting or whatever, we'll use a boardroom. But yeah, for the most part, I'm driving around on phone calls, sitting in meetings, or doing email. And to be honest, I mean, it's interesting. I talk about this in the book, but it was a lot more fun in the beginning, right? I think that the example I use there is like, if you chop wood in your backyard because it feels awesome, right? You're just like chopping wood and it's satisfying, and you're going to make a nice fire for yourself. And one day your neighbor pops his head over the fence and says, hey man, can you chop me some wood? I'll pay you $5. Suddenly this thing that is a passion has become a business. You're like, oh my God, I never thought I could make money doing this thing I love. That's sweet. And before you know it, you go door to door in your neighborhood and you're chopping wood for the entire neighborhood. You got 2 buddies you're doing it with. You're all side by side. You have a nice beer afterwards. It's really exciting. But then if you fast forward 20 years and you own a sawmill and all you do all day is you sit in a little air-conditioned office and you do Microsoft Excel, planning out the yields for the sawmill, it's a very different job than where you started, right? And it's like, there's a Bob Seger quote I love, which is, I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then, right? I wish I could kind of go back to the beginning. I love that time, right? I think the most exciting time of any business is actually the start. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate my life or anything, but I find myself having to find that energy in other places. So writing is one. Doing podcasts like this, I find really fun. And then I'm always tinkering and starting new businesses off to the side.
So we've gotten from drop kids off, meetings for 2 hours, and then what was after that again?
So meetings and stuff, and then usually like 2 or 3, I might go meet a friend, I might go play tennis, might run some errands, try to
still in the 5 hours of work right now.
Yeah, like that's basically it. Like I'm usually working, it's about 4 hours usually. So it's usually 2 hours of meetings, 2 hours of email and not email, but like doing my Google Docs and chatting with people on text and stuff. And then I'm usually done by 3 or 4. And then sometimes I'll pick up the kids. Other times I'll just go home and like do a sauna and a cold plunge or chill. And again, it's not that I'm not relaxing. I'm still stressed. I'm still thinking. I'm reading or listening to podcasts or audiobooks, or I'm like texting with friends and seeing what's going on. So I am working, but it's just not like headphones on, sitting in front of the computer work. It's a very different form of work. It's a lot of human routing. I'm really routing stuff around.
And this is because this stuff is so time sensitive and needs to be routed like 16 hours a day.
Well, here's an example. It's like I woke up to 100 texts today. One of the texts was you saying, hey, I want to redesign one of my websites. Who should I use? And I went, oh, okay, I got the right person I'll intro you to. Send the text immediately. It's like a lot of random stuff like that, right? Where there's all these people wanting to sell their business, companies that we own that should be working with one another, problems that our CEOs are bringing to me and saying, hey, like, how should I handle this problem? So the nice thing is I could ignore them all, and for at least a while, nothing would go bad. Whereas if you're running a business day to day, you can't say that. But yeah, I'm just putting out fires everywhere.
So, okay, so we're at the end of the work day, and then you sauna, cold plunge, and...
Usually kids. So I'm divorced. I have my kids so I have kids 7 days on, 7 days off. If I have my kids, chaos. Kids get home, they're running around like crazy people. hang out with them, maybe make dinner, play a board game, watch a movie, put them down. That usually takes till about 8 o'clock. And then me and my girlfriend will chat or read or watch a movie for an hour. I go to bed at like 9:30 usually. So my day is pretty compressed.
What time did you get up again? You said like
7.
Dude, how long are you sleeping?
I sleep from 10:30. Oh, sorry. I go to bed at 9:30. I read for an hour. So I always read for an hour. I go to sleep at 10:30. And then I usually fall asleep within 15, 20 minutes. And then I sleep for 8 hours, 8.5 hours. So
I was going to say a baby sleep time.
no, yeah, I wish.
Hobbies, I guess, is that just what you already described as part of your regular day? Like, do you do anything outside of the typical? Like, you play tennis during your workday, it seems.
My biggest problem is that I've always taken my hobbies and turned them into businesses. So like when I
Where's
was
your
in
tennis
my,
business?
no tennis business. I've learned a little bit, but when I was in my early 20s, I started DJing, and I immediately was like, oh, I know this DJ. I'll do like a DJ course business. Like I've always just had that urge. And so I've had to really work to find good hobbies. And really like tennis, I play guitar really poorly. I love to read. And I also love to read fiction because I like to take my mind off of work. And I found out I'd always be reading business and nonfiction and stuff and kind of learning the same things over and over again. So I love reading fiction. I love movies. That's how we invested in Letterboxd. I was a big user. I love coffee. Bought AeroPress.
Mm.
No, yeah.
How many coffees do you have a day?
2.
Okay, so that's like, what, 160 milligrams?
Well, I usually have either 2 coffees or I have 1 coffee and a yerba mate. We own Matina with Dr. Andrew Huberman, and I usually have one of those. That's 120 milligrams. And a coffee is what, 60 usually? Like an AeroPress would be about 60 or 80.
Yeah.
So whatever that is.
How did that partnership come to be? Where you just like, you gotta get something that you have your face behind that you love and will help coordinate it? Or how did that come to be?
Well, we got to know each other because I had him come up, and kind of before he was already, starting to become popular, but we had him come up and speak at UVic, the University of Victoria, and I got to spend some time with him, and we got to know each other and hit it off. And then I went down to Malibu to hang out with him one day, and we were just chatting about business opportunities and different things he could do and stuff. And he'd mentioned a couple times he liked yerba mate. And so we said, well, I mean, what if we could find a really amazing yerba mate company? And so we ended up buying Matina together, and he's obsessed with it. He drinks like 4 a day, and he's formulated his own sugar-free version for the company.
So that's 480 milligrams
Yeah.
of caffeine?
I think he's either 3 or 4.
Kind of surprised.
I know. He said it doesn't affect his sleep. I don't know. It seems crazy.
Damn.
Yeah. That's not part of his protocol that he puts out on the internet. Your sleep protocol is pound 4 yerba mates at 3 p.m. Yeah.
How's that going, by the way?
It's going really well.
Okay.
Yeah, we've grown the business really significantly, and the founder's awesome. It's one of those things where it's like, I have this saying, I love when things are 1 + 1 = 100, right? So it's like you take this awesome product whose biggest problem is awareness, right? So these guys were in Whole Foods, but they're this little Canadian brand. They have a really passionate following, but in order to get discovered, they have to spend so much money on marketing. And then you take somebody who loves yerba mate, has the perfect brand, and they start talking about it. And you put those 2 things together and you can make this huge business. And I think it's similar to, imagine if you were just doing YouTube ads and then someone came to you and it's like, hey, you could buy this amazing like shampoo and conditioner company that aligns perfectly with your hair loss stuff, right? I think that's 1 + 1 = 100.
Do you feel free of the hedonic treadmill now?
No.
No?
Like, I know. I think there's this famous psychologist who just died named Daniel Kahneman, and all of his studies were around decision making and all the different ways you can be influenced negatively or positively. So one example would be, some friend of yours does a small favor for you, and then they ask for a big favor. Hey, will you babysit my kids tomorrow? Or whatever it is, right? you're going to feel very indebted and you're going to want to do it. And someone asked him a couple of years ago in an interview, are you still vulnerable? You know everything. You studied this. You're the one, you wrote the book about this. Are you still vulnerable? And he goes, I'm as vulnerable as anyone else. Right. And I think the same is true with me. I think that I go through these periods of expansion where I say, I'm going to live it up and buy houses and buy the fancy car and all that stuff. And then I go through periods of contraction. And this has happened in the past before where I crush everything down and I go, for a while I was like meditating a lot. I was wearing the same outfit every day. Didn't have a corporate office. I just went to a cafe. I was driving a crappy Volvo. Like I go through those periods, and then every once in a while I say like, fuck it, let's go do something fun. And so I think that I, like anyone, will slip into that over and over and over again, I'm sure. And I don't know that you can fully avoid it. I think awareness is important though. And I think that a lot of people look at wealthy people and go, well, if I was just wealthy, then I wouldn't feel this pain, right? The best way to think about it that I think most people could relate to is a lot of people, when they're unhappy with their lives, they say, I need to go traveling. I got to go to Europe and find myself. Sure. Well, if you've ever been to Europe, I think you'll realize like your brain comes with you, right? It's like your feelings, your anxiety, your depression, your problems, your childhood crap. It all comes with you in your brain wherever you go. And I think the same is true with money, that money makes life a little bit easier in certain ways. It's a universal lubricant, but it doesn't solve problems, and it actually adds problems in many ways.
Near the beginning of the podcast, you had mentioned you were going to table the non-sexy and sexy products that you would recommend, I think. Mm-hmm. Have you thought of any since?
I thought about it. I got a couple weird ones. So one's kind of boring. It's I love this Danish company, or it's either Danish or Swedish. I think it might be Swedish, but the founder of Acne. Have you ever heard of Acne jeans?
Acne
jeans, literally like acne on your face.
No.
Jeans, very cool Swedish fashion brand. He, I believe, sold out or left, and he's obsessed with consumer electronics. Like he makes like little microphones and synthesizers and boom boxes and stuff. And they're just incredibly beautiful. They look like Dieter Rams from Braun designed them. And I just bought a CM15. It's by his company's called Teenage Engineering, and it's the CM15 microphone. And it's this beautiful little silver square, and stands on a little tripod. And I absolutely love it. It's so beautiful. Software-wise, I just installed this app called Opal on my phone. And what it does is, whenever you open a distracting app like Instagram, you have to tap the button that you want to use it like 20 times, and it changes the amount of time. So sometimes on the first tap, sometimes it's like 100 taps to open, and it's actually caused me to be like, what am I doing? I'm like a rat trying to like get a hit of cocaine or something, and I'll close it. So I've been using that.
How do you make sure you can actually do your job if you're a social media person though?
Well, I only use Twitter, and I locked myself out of Twitter for most of the day. I don't really have much access. So usually I'll actually write tweets in Apple Notes. And then I also use an app called Freedom. And Freedom is kind of similar. It blocks distracting websites. So I have no access to the news. I have no access to like Reddit, all those things on a browser. And I've actually done it so that there's no way to get out of it. So I'm like fully locked on all my devices. And honestly, it goes back to that thing of treating yourself like an addict. Like, if I don't want to read news, I can think I don't want to read news over and over again, but like I'll still look at it. Yeah. And if it's just blocked, I can't look at it. So I really like that. The other one, the final one, is a weird recommendation that nobody talks about, or very few people talk about. I have lifelong anxiety. I've always been the guy who is thinking about what could go wrong. And that served me really, really well in business. Like I always think I'm scanning the horizon for icebergs. And in business, that's awesome because you identify problems before they happen and you build systems to prevent bad things from happening. But in life, it's quite miserable. I had this night, I remember 3 years ago, I was sitting watching a movie with a friend, and I just kept looping on anxious thoughts about work and business, and I didn't take my supplement I was supposed to take, and oh no, I'm not watching the movie, and so this person next to me is going to be mad at me when we talk about the movie after because I'm not going to know what happened. And I remember going like, okay, I have an anxiety problem. Like, it's official. And I went to my doctor and I got SSRI. And I started researching it because I'm kind of like, again, I'm high anxiety. I'm a health nerd. And I start researching this and I realized that certain people are genetic super metabolizers of SSRIs. And I realized that I am a super metabolizer of this particular SSRI. So I got a different one. And then I waited a year. I had this SSRI sitting on my kitchen or my bathroom sink. It was taunting me. And I was thinking like, oh my God, if I take this, am I going to take my edge away? Am I going to ruin my life? Am I going to be a zombie? Side effects. And finally, I started taking it. And it was like, I didn't realize that people could just feel like that, right? Like I just felt like the volume on that voice in my head was turned down by like 40%. And it was still there. I could still listen to it. You know, the one that was like, hey, you should take your vitamins and do all these things, but it wasn't torturing me. It wasn't driving me crazy. And what I think is interesting about this is I think a lot of people are very scared of taking SSRIs. And for me, at least, it was incredibly impactful. And I think a lot of people suffer from anxiety. But interestingly, this super metabolizer problem, I think, is much more broad than most people are aware of, because I talk to a lot of people who take the kind of mainstream SSRIs and they say, oh my God, I instantly felt sick. I couldn't sleep. I had all these terrible symptoms. And I think a lot of those side effects could easily be explained by having like a big spike in your blood. And so basically what you can do for anyone who's listening, who's curious about this, you can go on 23andMe and you can check if you're a super metabolizer. And if you are, there's alternative drugs to take. And so I take a drug called vortioxetine, and I have no side effects. I get a little upset stomach if I take it in an empty stomach, but I've had no other issues. And that is a freaking game changer for me.
There's also some obscure or relatively unknown supplements that are typically, I would never say supplements are going to outperform drugs in many circumstances, but saffron extract in particular, have you ever tried?
I have tried it, yeah.
How did it work for you?
I have like really bad acid reflux, and I actually felt awesome on it, but I was getting really bad acid reflux from it. But I've had quite a few friends, interestingly, that take saffron extract and have a really good time with it.
Yeah. So it is very important that you get a good standardized extract of it, because not all saffron is the same. And I think we're the first company to put it in an energy drink. So yeah, really obscure ingredient, but it's super impactful on all the same metrics of antidepressants. I don't know, like endpoints that you would seek for having like a good drug, but with a relative lack of side effects, at least from the literature I've seen comparing. And it's even been used to attenuate SSRI-induced erectile dysfunction in people who are prone to it.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That explains why the Persians are so happy.
So just a heads up, we quickly cut so we could pull up an old text message that Andrew sent me of his key things. Because he asked me this very question a while back, and we basically hit each other with a list of a bunch of stuff. So you want to just fire through these?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start at the top. So Oura Ring. So I use that to track my sleep. That's given me a ton of insights, especially around alcohol. I don't really drink very often anymore, but I notice when I do drink, it massively affects my sleep. And it's kind of a good feedback mechanism to encourage good habits. I have a Leica Q3 camera, and I was someone who used my iPhone constantly for, I think there's that saying, the best camera is the one that you have with you. And I kind of thought that, but I got a Leica when my kids were little because I figured I wanted to have really high quality photos. And it's blown my mind. It's like 100 times better than an iPhone photo. So I love that. The Kindle Paperwhite, I can't leave home without it. I have one. I have two of them, and I have one in my bag at all times. I love to read. And the thing I really like about it is that it helps me retain information. So if you read a paper book, you read an interesting fact, you might put a sticky note on it. You're never going to look at it again. With my Kindle, I have it synced to the cloud. It comes back through my email using Readwise, another great product. So I can keep track of all the things I've been reading and remind myself of. I use a Freestyle Libre CGM. I wear one kind of intermittently, but if I'm starting to pig out and eat bad stuff, I start wearing one. And I just find it's a good way to understand what am I eating that is metabolically fucking me, basically.
Was there anything you thought was fine that ended up being a disaster that you had to cut out?
I was eating black bean tacos, and they spike me like 4x what ice cream does. And I was eating them like 2 or 3 times a week, wasn't thinking about it. Oats are really bad for me. Bananas are really bad. I was having a smoothie every single day that was spiking my blood sugar like way beyond where it should be. So that's been really helpful. I love Dyson products, which I mentioned earlier, and I just got their new Dyson, what is it called? Dyson BP03, which is like their newest thing. It looks like R2D2 and like sits in your house, and it filters out formaldehyde and stuff. And that's something that like no one really talks about. Air quality is really, really a big deal. Like,
you sent me that video, and candidly, I have not watched it because it was so long.
You should go down the rabbit hole. It's really interesting.
What on here assesses the current state of your living environment?
Yeah, Dyson BP03 is the thing you want. If you text me, I'll send it to you.
Okay, but that one, it not only cleans it up, it like reports when it's clean and will basically alert you as to your house.
Yeah, it'll tell you. It'll be like, hey, your levels are bad, and if it'll either filter it out, or it'll be like, hey, it's still staying.
And is a standard like HEPA filter insufficient?
Yeah. This can do formaldehyde. Not most of them can't do formaldehyde, and that's often what's in like flooring products or various household products.
Some people's autoimmune issues, just from mold.
Oh yeah, I mean mold. I've got a friend who had that. You think about PFAS. Like, there's just so many of these environmental things that can be really bad. I use the Beast blender, which I absolutely love. It's super simple and aesthetic. Every other blender I've used is like really ugly. I use OmniFocus for task management, and I use the Getting Things Done framework. The idea behind that is you put absolutely everything in your brain, whether it's remembering to buy groceries to company stuff, into a system, and you just don't trust your brain to remember anything. And that's worked out really well for me. I have Lutron Caseta light switches all over my house, so I can say to my HomePod at any time, turn off this light or that light, which is subtle but so nice not to have to turn off your lights at night.
Have you ever heard of Alfred for an app?
For which? It's
like an app for Mac that is something for productivity. Mm-hmm. I'm like just getting into this stuff now, and it's like there's so many things. Like I don't.
Your YouTube just like switches all of a sudden to all these nerds, and they're all sharing like a new menu bar thing you need.
Yeah, like when I hear you say you have a Freedom app that prevents you from doing stuff, but then you also have an Opal thing on your phone, and then you also have a workflow thing on the computer, and you also, it's holy shit, dude. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I definitely like I can go down the rabbit hole too far in productivity, and this leads back into anxiety. Like when I'm anxious, I'm a list maker. So I want to make lists, I want to build systems, and I think if I just build my perfect system, I won't feel anxiety. Yeah. Of course I still do. So I've built lots of systems. You should check out Raycast, by the way. That's an alternative to Alfred that's actually better in my opinion.
Yeah, sure.
I've got one more thing. The BMW iX electric SUV is like just a wicked car.
You were talking about a Tesla, like an
I also have a Tesla. Oh. I have two. One for me, one for my girlfriend.
Okay. And maybe this ties into the apps, but I mean, productivity tips. What could you speak to as the most impactful things you've learned to, because you only have like 4 to 6 hours per day. How are you?
Sleep. It's all sleep. If I sleep well, I can produce the work of, if I'm well rested, I can do, 10 hours of work in 4 hours. If I'm poorly rested, I can do 1 hour of work in 8 hours. I'm just like a piece of crap when I'm not well rested. Mm. Other than that, delegation and really getting into the habit of, I like to say, you want to be Teflon for tasks. You don't want to do anything that someone else can do unless you really, really love it. And you want to only focus on the stuff that's your highest and best use. And that is hard earned. I mean, I've been someone who, I joke is like a swoop and pooper, where I like swoop into all my employees' work and mess with it and try and fix it and correct it. And I've learned over time just to delegate and to make a change when someone's not working out. And so that's my biggest productivity tip of all is, if you can leverage, I said it earlier, but if you can leverage other people's time to achieve the things you want to achieve, that's incredibly powerful.
Awesome, man. Well, appreciate your time, and thanks for hosting me on yours as well. And I will hopefully have this time to where your book comes out, so I'll put a link in the description below for Never Enough, and highly recommend it. I blasted through it in like a day and a half. It was super entertaining, and yeah, I think any up-and-coming or current entrepreneur would definitely relate to a lot of the things in there and also be entertained at the same time. So check it out, guys, and follow Andrew's new podcast. He's an influencer now. So where can they find you?
Neverenough.com. You can find my book, my newsletter, my podcast all there. And you'll see there's an episode with Derek where he's wearing a different colored shirt, but actually in the same studio on the same day.
Yeah. But you guys didn't guess that, right? All right. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Sweet, dude. That was fun.
Yeah.
That was really fun.